Thank you. Yeah, so as I'm Steinunn. I've been working for several years at NI, and as most of my time I've been working on audio effects. It's been mentioned actually by quite a few speakers here how music production is really influenced by the past, and they were talking about processes and standards, tools, interfaces, and audio effects is definitely a strong contender there. Can you hear me? It feels a bit strange. Oh, maybe it's just up here. Yeah, so basically we've been quite focused on bringing the past to the future and this development, and we often refer to it as emulation. So basically bringing in or like making software or even hardware versions of older studio and performance gear. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this. What is our drive with this? A bit about the past, present, and where we're heading in the future, and learnings, and basically a little bit of open brainstorming to kind of get some thinking going, and something that I've been thinking myself, and I just wanted to share this with you a bit. Yeah, and I think also this talk was mislabeled as artificial intelligence and machine learning, so maybe I'll have to disappoint or bring relief to some people. There's not going to be, it's more about DSP, so I mean, but if, it's now your time to sneak out if you came here for that. But also in that sense, I'd like to recommend Brecht de Man's talk later on. He's going to bring in more, probably picking up a bit from what I'm talking about and talk more about intelligence and audio processing, so I'm looking forward to that. So basically, let's do a bit of a history, going back in time. One of the components or like elements, we've used quite a lot in both radio broadcasting and music production is delay. And we've used this both as a creative effect or more as a necessary tool to get a job done. It's used for sometimes like thickening to prevent, from re-recording the same part again and again. And also, more crazy creative effect used for echoes. And in the earliest implementations of this is probably flanging. And there you would have two different tape decks, and you would put, your finger slightly on one of them and create like a small offset. So this is, a way to kind of play with the phase of the signals a bit. And you can imagine, at that time, or like in the 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s, tape machines were not really easy to get by. They were come by, and they were expensive, clunky, and not really accessible to everyone. And a few years down the road, we had more portable versions, and these could be used in a live setting, and there would also be opportunity to use it in a more creative context. And I would say about tape, it's romantic, and I think we kind of, romanticizing about it, but it's also pretty clunky and expensive, and writing signals to tape is not really the ideal way to do it. It's quite a nonlinear medium. You need some workarounds called bias to kind of get the tape started, to start writing to it, and if you have really high amplitude signals, you have some saturation. So basically, if you're talking about if you're talking about clean processing, it's not ideal, even though we might think about it a bit differently. And if you have tape delay, you have inconsistent playback speed. So it's constantly changing delay time a little bit. Few years further down the road, like mid-late 70s, we had access to integrated circuits, and delay was implemented in these. So basically, for example, for delay, you would have like several stages of capacitors where charge would move between them. Also here, it was becoming cheaper, more portable, accessible, but still, even though you would have hundreds or thousands of these stages, you would have delayed time in the range of milliseconds. And you would have some degeneration of the signal, like going from stage to stage, and because there was some noise from a clocking of the system and so on. So you'd have kind of a low frequency character. So it's also not completely clean signal if you're thinking about it that way. Mid-80s, digital technology is becoming more affordable. You have like the earliest digital pedals. You'd still need to catch up a little bit when it comes to sample rate or bit depth, but the quality was getting there, and there was a more affordable, and you could do longer delays, even few or tens of seconds. Mid-90s, like you could already record theoretically at your home, like sound cards were becoming, more, reaching CD quality, and you could basically, if you're reaching, quite the cleanliness, if you say, and recording and processing, and you could already do, as I say, like quite a bit of home, processing, or like, more portable. And, it's the mid-90s, things are looking really, promising. Basically, it was really early versions of computers and memory and processing power was still, limited resource, but that was only to improve. And at this time, you could think really, like, okay, we're really getting there. Like, we're, really at the verge of democratizing these tools, and the universe is basically ours. I mean, we can do whatever we can, like with zeros and ones, and it's only to, you just need to think about, what to do, and what do we do? So I mean, essentially we'd reached, the clean processing, effect, and we could do it now like clean and freed from the limitations and the artifacts of the circuits and components of the past, but then it was just simply too clean. Like we didn't really like that. It was like harsh and cold. So I mean, since that time, decent amount of DSP manpower has gone into really trying to capture the soul of these devices, and I think it's really, it's partly defendable or fully defendable, and I'll come to this later. But then like it's at times like this, or like when you see this, where you think okay, is this maybe is this the best way to move the DSP mankind forward, and is it maybe is it adding a lot of more opinions or like choices to users, or is it creating more anxiety of what to choose? And I'm not pointing fingers here, but probably even mostly myself, because I've actually contributed to some of these, and it's also why I can allow myself to look at it in a bit of a sarcastic way. But I think it's a valid question. I think we all see a trend here, and of course we could do like things like extending these devices, like the most obvious part is extending ranges and so on. So I mean, definitely, and a lot of what we're doing today is really inspired by this, and we've, made, built innovative tools on top of this. But still a significant part of industry and academic research has gone into this. And a little bit, just a really brief overview for people who are not so familiar with emulations. So, I mean, there are few approaches that are used. I mean, mainly, it also depends, like some of these, versions are really, full 8B, models of devices. Some are, more kind of thought as inspired by, and you need to think about every device is really, different. You need to, there's no, first you do this, then you do this, and then you do this. You always need to kind of look at it as a unique problem. And it's also not, it's not something that, us as audio engineers or DSP engineers, it's not like, only gear porn for us. I mean, it's been clear, users have been really asking for this. And we're certainly not the only industry that's, reminiscing about the past when it comes to this. So first, I mean, like one of the approaches is often referred to as white box modeling. And there you kind of just try to gather everything you can know about the interiors and open the device up, if you say so. You look at the circuit, you see if you recognize, some parts in there, like are there some components in there that, have been modeled, or like is there some filter you can solve for? Then, you take these pieces and try to add them together. What is, often a bit, of a challenge, what should you use as a reference point there? Like a lot of the academic research is, using basically a SPICE-like models to set up these circuits and use that as a reference point. But, if you have a user or like an owner of that device at home, they're probably going to strongly disagree with you that this is the sound. So I mean, these are, a lot of these devices are not young. They age. They've been repaired on the way. Like maybe some components have been exchanged. It matters how long often you had the device on. Like a lot of the components are heat sensitive, so they interact with each other. And this is a bit, there's no right answer, like what you should use as a reference point. But you can get pretty close to the ideal working with these circuit simulation models. Another approach is basically to think about it as a black box, and there you just need to kind of think about what should the device do, like what am I trying to capture here, and there you send in test signals like waveforms, usually sines, sine sweeps, amplitude sweeps, frequency sweeps, noise, and basically it depends really what you're trying to capture, if it's nonlinearity or some frequency changing dispersion or whatever. So you try to isolate the functionality that you're looking for, and turn the others off, while you're kind of focusing on that, and then hopefully that all makes sense together. More commonly in my experience, you just do whatever you need to do to get the job done, and that's usually a combination of white box and black box approaches. And if you'd like to get into some of that, I can actually recommend that there's been a person in, I think, Udo Sulzer's group in Hamburg that's been doing quite recent research in generalizing kind of, gray box and black box modeling for a lot of effects. I can definitely, if you're looking for an intro point, it's a good, I think, to see what type of test signals to send to what type of devices. And often, I can speak of it, it's a bit of a, it's the most rewarding, but also the most frustrating process you can think about it. It's usually like you get to the 80% of, your goal in the first 20% of the time, and at that time you get pretty cocky, and we're like, oh, I just need to do a little bit of fine tuning, and then I'm there. But there's always, something kind of unexpected, and that also brings, quite a bit of learnings. What I find a bit interesting is also, why are we so drawn to the past? Like, why do we go there? And maybe this part is also just, asking questions and maybe activate, us to think about it. And of course, the most obvious part is, we needed to bring, big studios into our software environments. And it's also about the democratization. Now you can really easily have access to a lot of these tools that you didn't have before, as even a teenager with a laptop, you could have, full access to really expensive studios that you didn't have before, and hence a lot more people are making music. And I also think, we needed to preserve a lot of these, the sound of these devices. And what happens often with these, with gear is that, they're originally meant as tools to finish a necessary task, but then, they get pushed to the extremes, and it's usually like there are limitations, and, the artifacts become the signature sound of the system. So I would definitely say that, you can think about it as, something that's originally thought about as tools, then they become instruments. And for that sense, as like these devices are not, a lot of them are not getting younger, and they're like only available in limited quantities. So it's definitely, we needed to, it's definitely defendable that we are, capturing this to make it available to the future generations. One theory is basically, analog, processing and analog, just sounds so much nicer. It's just warmer, and it's, and usually, like when you talk to, audio people, like they have like, really kind of positive semantics, to describe, like analog. There's like, it's warm, it's soft, full, deep with soul, or like, like even creamy. There was like a couple of people here who were at the FX, were thinking about what that means even. But you can see like these descriptors, as opposed to cold, harsh, that's a theory. But then, there's also been quite a bit of focus to early digital technology, bringing this back. And this was actually one of my first projects, or my first project at Native Instruments, was to capture the character of old, like early digital samplers, and those who are into 80s, like late 80s, early 90s, mid 90s hip hop, they all know this. Like this was a really significant part of the processing or production chain there. And there, I think it's been a while, but I think like, so for example, with the SP1200 was, probably the most primitive, but also, setting the tone there. I think it was a sampling rate of 26K, and they had cutoff filters that were a bit, you know, a bit over 13. I think they were 14, 15, 16K. So like those who are familiar with Nyquist, that you need to sample the signal at, you know, at least double the highest frequency content. You know, you'd get some aliasing in there, for example. Had really primitive pitch shifting mechanism at 12 bits, and you know, and of course, like, you know, memory was very limited. So I think it had like 8 registers with, I think it was 2 seconds each. And what was used as a trick, as a workaround, you know, there was, you know, you would record like from a 45 RPM record, or you would record like a 33 RPM on 45 RPM, and then you would slow it down. So you'd have like, you know, longer signal, but, you know, decreased resolution and, you know, in a really primitive, you know, pitching way. So, I mean, you can think about, you know, adding the aliasing and all of that in there, like you would, you know, like audio purists would probably, you know, cause like physical pain even. So I think like the analog, you know, it doesn't really hold. Like, so, I mean, can we think like, are we just stuck, you know, I need to speed up, I'm saying, like, are we stuck in, you know, a loop of 20, 25 years of repeating ourselves? You know, people making tools in late 90s, early 2000s were listening to music, you know, 20, 25 years earlier. And similarly, you know, like just a hint, you know, then if somebody's going to be looking for some inspiration for the next project, I mean, that's maybe the area we should be looking at. I mean, there's also, like, I was also thinking about, you know, maybe it's something we kind of, you know, get some used to these sounds and, you know, start liking them over time. And we have some, similarly, we have, you know, if you are raised in a more, you know, dissonant, you know, with more dissonant scales, you tend to not find them as unpleasant as if you're raised in Western, you know, music theory environment with more consonant scales. So maybe it's something, you know, that we get ourselves kind of familiar with and used to. So maybe it's, you know, what we seek, what we really feel, you know, the comfort, you know, our comfort blanket. And you know, we also have similar history with, you know, for example, I mean, electric guitar and driving it heavily into distortion. It's not like that was heavily celebrated by all generations and cultures, you know, at the time. And, you know, we can even, you know, but for somebody of my generation, I mean, I grew up just, you know, hearing it on the radio in the car. Like, I mean, it was just distortion was just a normal, you know, part of my kind of sound, you know, repository or like, you know, palette. So, I mean, maybe we can even say that, you know, autotune is the electric guitar and distortion of our times. I don't know, like I have a bit of a hard time sometimes in myself, not, you know, like I don't want to be old, but, you know, you're kind of judging, and autotune is probably the kid in school that's always being picked on. I don't know if you've, you know, probably some of you have seen this picture, and I don't know, you know, if you have, maybe you had similar, you know, you had similar kind of reflection as I had, and I was, you know, just like laughing inside of you, and you're like, oh, these kids today, you know, they don't know how to appreciate. And then I started thinking, you know, is it to me to say that, you know, some, you know, degenerating of the sound is more superior to other? Like, you know, in the end, like, you know, what my job is, you know, or like our job as DSP people is basically degenerating the sound, you know, when we are kind of, you know, processing it. And probably, you know, in this chain, like this vintage tube compressor, you know, in like most cases it will be an emulation or like, you know, some type of plugin. So I don't know. I mean, it's also just, you know, maybe in a few years' time the joke will be on us. You know, like it will be people reminiscing about you know, things that, you know, we think is horrible today, or I don't know. Like it just, you know, half serious, but still. I mean, what have we? I mean, I think we've learned a lot from this, and I think it's been really a you know, necessary journey. I mean, personally for me, I can say like I've gained a lot of respect for people who are building circuits and you know, like knowing the limitations that they had to live with. And you feel also a bit like a brat, you know, growing, you know, being able to program this in a relatively high level languages and being able to just, you know, visualize everything super easily and you know, having almost, you know, unlimited access to processing and memory. But it's also like, you know, just, you know, throwing it out there, it's quite interesting. I mean, if you would have, you know, met somebody who was building an instrument or like building some effects or a device in the 50s, 60s, you know, and you would have, you know, said, you know, I have this, you know, portable device that's relatively low, you know, priced, and you can process without any artifacts, you know, and you have unlimited, you know, like all the memory you can think of for your application and processing power. I mean, would they have just dropped their stuff and given you all their money, or like would they have been like, oh no, I'd prefer to work with my, limitations. And I think it's also, I think it's, also kind of half serious, but it's kind of interesting that we are here, like, I don't know how many years later, trying to replicate, their artifacts and imitations. And it's, it's, just out there. And as I say, like, we've really collected interesting, good building blocks to move forward. And I'm not, it's not a black and white picture. We've been actually doing, we've been actually doing this a lot. We've been using these devices as kind of, components that we, rearrange into something new. And that's also, it's been quite interesting. And it's not only, individual components, but it's also reusing the concepts and kind of, building up in a modular way. And I think, my personal learning is also, I try to, not project what my passion, or like what I like and dislike over to others. You need to be kind of, when you're working for a company, that is making tools for, very broad, crowd. You need to think about, it's in the end, it's, music isn't really, hard. We have a lot of science in there, but there's no right or wrong solution. Like every person's preference is based on, what their background is and where they're coming from, and that's something that it's also just, to think a bit, about. Just, I think, now I've it's been quite a simplification and high level, but I think it's a good thought exercise, just, whatever field you're in, to kind of take a step back and look at it, in a more abstract way. And then it's also, I think, to thought, as a food for thought, kind of, and part of the discussion is like how much of the past is present in our tools. And as Friedemann mentioned also yesterday from on the Ableton talk, I mean, it is also really hard for us. I mean, we have expectations from our users or music producers, and that you cannot make turn the world upside down over one day. But I think it's good to think about this. What stop a little bit, like why and where to head next, and also onboarding the next generation. I mean, it's very likely that people who are starting music production today were even just born when software was quite established already in our workflows. And what is their relation to a lot of these things? Like, a lot of kids today probably don't even know what tape is. I'm not trying to sound arrogant, but they probably maybe have seen it in history books or even or YouTube video. So I mean, so is it going to be there? Are they going to be screaming for a lot of this, or are we or are we should we head somewhere else? I mean, it's an open question. And I hope also I didn't offend anyone. I mean, I think it's also, as I say, like, absolutely not to discourage anyone who is thinking about modeling a pedal or something. I mean, I'm still interested in that, and I think every device brings new learnings. But what I say, like, I mean, just a bit of a thought exercise that I try to ask myself a little bit, like, what if we had the scenario where we would have had skipped the step of analog hardware, like if we didn't know the warm distortion of tubes and tape, or if we would never have heard any vintage synthesizer, like or like resonant filter, or like feedback loops with pleasant non-linearity. I mean, where would we be seeking our inspiration? And similarly, like if we would have gone directly into making clean, harsh sound, what would be our definition of warm? I think that's basically it. Thank you.
Thank you for this great talk. Any questions?
Yeah, so I guess just to follow it up, what is the thought of, if we had skipped that whole analog period and just come straight to the digital warmth? Is that something you guys are exploring right now? Is that,
I mean, we're also always, trying to find, what is the future of things, and it's probably, something we have as discussions. I mean, I think what I put down here is, more kind of my involvement through doing these effects and kind of taking a step back and, as I say, like looking at it, of course, half seriously and half, but I think it's, yeah, I mean, I think it's good wherever you are to really think about, take yourself out of the situation. I think that's often needed to be, creative and think about more innovative solutions. So, I mean, I think that's.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I have a quick question on the on that slide where you see all these UIs as well, and if that's so interesting that you just said that if we wouldn't have gone through this analog phase, would we still have the sound? But the UI seem to really make a reference to that past stage, and it's so inconvenient, right? They use up so much space on the screen, and but all the customers still want them. I mean, what is your advice to new plugin makers? Should they be in terms of UI design?
I don't know. I think especially. I mean, probably it's even like they're as also pointing to Friedemann's talk yesterday, and I think companies who are already established and have products that people know that we are a little bit in an unprivileged position there because our users have really high expectations, and and you can get even just changing something a little bit too much might create a big fuss, so possibly, I mean, you can think about yourself really. You don't have any expectations, like of course you need to build your ground, but I would say definitely, yeah, like try to just maybe like maybe these were the ideal building components, maybe that was just meant to be, and we have also nonlinearity and and a lot of instruments as well. I mean, and naming one example. But it's also just, try to just, it's of course like hard to unknow what you know, but just try to kind of, get take a step back.
Any more questions?
So to what extent do you think that the old devices possibly just got it right, and maybe some of the new technology is just too complicated, and so people are falling back to using the older technology because it's simpler?
No, I think we've seen in general a big wave going back to limitations, and I think you can see, I mean, like the modular, everything, and I think and I think that's the challenge of the industry as well, to kind of cater new technology also in a more accessible way, and I think that's something that we've been maybe not focusing that much on in the last few years, but it's my feeling that we really need to think about the user experience and how we present all of this. And also, I mean, I think a part of maybe the complications here are that we are adopting a lot of concepts from the past that is really known to people who were already producing at that time. But they say, like, what does that mean to a newcomer? And they're just looking at, like, why do you have a circle? Why do I have a circular component where I need to change my range on a screen? Like, what sense does it make? But to me and you, like, it makes a lot of sense. So I think it's basically you need to, as I say, and it's also a broader sense. You need to kind of put yourself in a mindset of others and a broader group than your own bubble, basically.
More questions.
Yeah, thanks, first of all. And you talked a bit about the emulation of the sound of the SP1200, which is in Machina, of course. How do you go about starting that? Are you coming from a perspective of someone who knows that sound intricately and he'll have feedback for you, or are you coming from the electrical components and you know everything about them, so that must be the sound that it generates, or the artifacts that it generates?
I think for that one, that one I did like a mix. I mean, I did a lot of test signals. I mean, for example, for the pitching algorithm, you can see kind of, I think it was just like a sine wave, and you can kind of pitch it up and down, for example, and just see how much it is and what's happening. I mean, you have quantization, obviously, like for the bits. And then there was actually quite a few filters that were, pretty standard. I think it was like Sallen key filters, so you just have, that is pretty well known. So you can, you need to do a hybrid mix just to figuring things out and then add them all together and hope it makes sense. Yeah.
One last question before we break into lunch.
Hi. You talked about the tools turning into instruments. Do you think there's something intrinsic about those old analog things that they would break in ways that were interesting that we're not achieving with the current digital? Because I've started playing with analog synths, and things happen by accident in a good way, whereas you break your code and it's not good.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It doesn't sound beautiful. It just doesn't build, or or like it blows up or whatever. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think that's also like the part about music making in general. I think what we're drawn to is the imperfections, and I think that's also the whole discussion about should we bring in more intelligence to it? Like, isn't it just going to be too mechanical, or just machines making music? Is that going to be interesting? And I think it's part of that discussion. But I say, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think we're very drawn to mistakes, and there's a lot of pleasant mistakes in history, and I think there's definitely it was no mistake to bring them with us forward. But I think the challenge is probably going to be, I mean, for the people at the time, they were forced to live with these limitations with just the technology at the time. Now I think it's our challenge to think about the limitations of it, when it comes to the interfaces or the backend, just in how are we going to cater it to people. Yeah.
Okay, then please join me in thanking the speaker for this interesting discussion. And I hope that the discussion continues over lunch. So lunch is downstairs. Thank you.